Alright, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. We are in Unit 3, Lecture number 3. Alright, and we ended last time with the idea of the Boston Tea Party, where the people of Boston met on the docks and basically celebrated the Sons of Liberty dressed up as Indians, dumping the King's Tea based on the Tea Act into the Boston Harbor, again causing massive amounts of loss financially for the king. So basically the king is, and the people of America are. Alright, so to get back at the people of Boston, specifically the people of Boston, that's who the king is mad at. Now he's taking all of his anger out on the people of Boston. And what he's going to do is he passes a group of laws called the Coercive Acts. And to coerce something or to coerce someone means to basically force or kind of make your way to change them. And this is passed in response to the Tea Party. So the Tea Party happened, and now the king is going to have his say. And basically the king is going to do those four things listed up here at the top. What the king does is, first of all, he makes a statement saying that he is going to take these four things away when the tea is all paid for. So basically, in a way, the king is being fair, saying that when the tea that you ruined or destroyed is paid for, I will take these things away. So even though it sounds like to the colonists this is terrible, and the colonists actually named them the Intolerable Acts, meaning that they can't tolerate them. And again, these acts only take place in Massachusetts because that's where this is all taking place. So these four things are: the Boston Harbor is closed, meaning that basically the people of Boston cannot trade with anyone or get goods in. So it's basically like you're closed off, or the king in a way is choking out Boston to the rest of the world. So imagine Mentor, Ohio, if we couldn't get new oil or gas supplies, if we couldn't get new food supplies, it would be pretty terrible. Whereas our city itself has pretty much everything you need due to magic. Alright. Number 2, you cannot have any public meetings. If you are caught out in the streets with a few people, the people, or soldiers actually, the soldiers of the town would arrest you, thinking that you are trying to have a meeting to go about, like, or maybe you were in the Sons of Liberty, or you were having a meeting to plan some sort of riot coming up. So the king and his soldiers just thought you were plotting against him. So they would arrest you and send you to jail for a while. Number 3 is there's a new quartering act where soldiers are allowed to be in private homes. So now these soldiers could search anything in your home if the king or soldiers or mayor or anyone thought that you were possibly smuggling or you are possibly a member of the Sons of Liberty, that they could send soldiers to live with you, basically to stop you from doing anything. Now that's so unfair. Again, going back to our Constitution or comparing it to it, we create the Fourth Amendment almost against that quartering act, saying that you cannot do that. Number 4, lastly, the British officials are going to be tried in England for crimes that happen here in America. This goes back to the Boston Massacre. If you are working for the king directly or for the government, if you committed any sort of crime in America, you would go back to England to face a judge and jury. Now, if you think about that, that sounds like an unfair rule for the people of Boston or for the people in Massachusetts. These soldiers could go around and do anything they wanted. They could shoot up people or do anything else. They could arrest anyone they wanted. And their crimes would actually go back to England with them, and then a judge and jury from England would have to try them, and they would probably be found not guilty because the punishments would happen back in England. And again, is that a punishment to have to be sent home for doing something in America? Probably not. Moving on, the Quebec Act, letter B. King George passes a law or passes an act saying that the land he won in the French and Indian War in Quebec and up into Canada, so this huge property that the king owns up into Canada, he gives to the French. So King George gives land away to the enemies that he has. So King George is giving land back to the French, who he just beat in a war, instead of giving it to the colonists. So again, going back to that idea between your parents and you, again, on Christmas morning, this is, again, that feeling on Christmas where the colonists have all this new land, and the king is giving the land, or in this case, your parents would give the Christmas gifts for you. You come downstairs, you see all these awesome Christmas gifts, you're so excited, And when you go to open them, your parents say no. And when there's a knock on the door, and when you open up the door, it's your worst enemy, the person you hate the most, and your parents give the gifts to them. So in this case, the colonists have all this new land that they could go to. They're very excited. And instead of being able to go colonize the new land, the king gives the land to his enemy, the French. All right, so the colonists respond. The colonies meet. 12 of the 13 colonies meet in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to discuss what's happening. Now, again, the ideas and the problems taking place in Boston are pushing the colonists into really deciding, should we be independent or should we stay with the king? The colony of Georgia does not attend. Georgia on a map is the farthest of the 13 colonies away from all these things taking place, so they think they're not part of this. So 56 men or 56 delegates meet to discuss what should we as colonies do. Number one, they adopt John Locke's Enlightenment philosophy of natural rights. They believe that the king is not granting them life, liberty, and property. So they agree that if the king, and just like John Locke said, John Locke was an Englishman, he was from England, and John Locke wrote that if your leader or president or ruler wasn't granting you those three things, that you had a right to fight back, you had a right to rebel. Number two, a militia or unpaid army is ordered to be trained with private citizens. This militia is going to go to Boston first, and any of the colonies could put militia members into that. So the militia is going to be formed and sent to Boston to try to maybe fight back against the British. The Suffolk Resolves was passed by Boston. Now, just in Boston and parts of Massachusetts, they stopped trade altogether with England. They just refused to trade. So the city of Boston, in a way, is almost breaking away by themselves, and the rest of the colonies are trying to help them, whether or not get to independence, but trying to keep this from going into a full-fledged war. The last but not least is in this big letter to the king saying they adopted these things and were forming a militia, and Boston was stopping trade with them. They did still appeal to the king. They wrote letters to the king saying that they are still loyal, and they tried to make peace with Parliament. They were explaining that they're no taxation without representation rule. They wanted to get that taken away. They wanted to be part of the Parliament process, and if so, they would pay their taxes and be loyal Americans. Moving on, once this letter gets to the king, Parliament's response is, we go back to William Pitt, who was the Secretary of War during the French and Indian War. He's still there. And William Pitt meets with King George III and basically tells the king to remove the soldiers from Boston. William Pitt is a pretty smart guy with war. He understands if the soldiers are still in Boston and Massachusetts causing all these problems, that possibly just in Boston or Massachusetts, this might spark a huge war that we can't afford, we can't do. And King George III kind of tells them, hey, I'm the king, I do what I want, and you're just, you don't know what you're doing. So I'm going to send more soldiers because the colonies to me are disobedient or bad kids. They're being poorly behaved, they're being terrible little kids, and I'm going to show them through force and through new rules that they have to follow everything I say. So the British send troops to Boston. And basically, the leader of this group is General Thomas Gage, and he's in charge. His job is to arrest the two leading terrorists. They are kind of like the FBI's most wanted two men at the time, and those two men are Sam Adams and John Hancock, who happen to be the leaders of the Sons of Liberty. Going on to the militia. Now, when the militia is being formed in Boston, they get the nickname the Minutemen. And they get that nickname because they are supposed to be, once they're trained, they're supposed to be ready to fight and a minute's notice. The people over at Memorial Middle School actually have the nickname Minutemen as well. They get that, and if you look at their logo is a Minuteman, a militia soldier. So in a way, good for them. But again, it is Memorial. Sorry, Memorial. Sam Adams hears that the Redcoats are planning on coming over to destroy the Concord Arsenal. An arsenal is a huge fort that houses weapons for the militia. So Sam Adams knows that, in a way, these Redcoats are planning on going there to destroy the weapons that the militia will have to fight back at them. So Sam Adams sends a couple of his men, his Sons of Liberty, to be ready to get the Minutemen ready to fight back in case this happens. Now, these two men are Paul Revere and William Dawes. You may know Paul Revere from history class from the past. You never really hear of William Dawes. I don't know why. He's just kind of forgotten in history. But these two men, their job was to go around in the Boston area and tell the people that the British are coming. And they were supposed to be warned by the Boston Church Tower, the tallest building in Boston at the time. And it's actually in the painting by Sam Adams of the Boston Massacre. If you look back at the big tower in the background, that's the church tower. And they were going to be warned with candle lights at the top. They were going to be warned if there was one candle, it was the British were coming in by land or marching in. Two candles, they were coming in by sea. Please, if you would like to, look up on Wikipedia or any other resource to check and see how the British actually showed up and what they did. But basically, these two men rode around at night, not screaming like you might have heard of. They weren't screaming that the British are coming. They would have been arrested for that. They basically went door to door to the members of the Sons of Liberty and to the militia, trying to wake them up and tell them, you know, the British are on their way. Let's go grab your stuff and start to get ready. Both of them, by the way, were arrested that evening and never fully completed their jobs, but they were let go the next day. Moving on to the last slide of the day, the battles of Lexington and Concord. On April 19th of 1775 in Lexington, the British, who had 700 redcoat soldiers, were met by, outside of Lexington, right where the arsenal is, they were met by 70 Minutemen. So again, not so great of a job, colonists, in really only getting 70 men to go up against 700 well-trained redcoat soldiers. Basically here what happens is that the Americans are just scared. They don't want to go into this. They are not ready. They are not trained for any kind of battle. And a lot of them are scared. So what happens is you have 700 men standing in a field trying to get through these 70 men who are standing to block them from getting to the arsenal. And it's kind of like a standoff. The 70 men don't want to start firing at anybody. If you think about that, why would the 70 men not want to shoot at 700? If you said that they are just scared and peeing themselves, you would be probably absolutely right. If those 70 men started shooting, these 700 men would wipe them out easily. You know, they're outnumbered 10-1, if I did the math correctly. I think I did. If you were the 700 men, the redcoats, you do not want to shoot at the 70, which sounds strange, but you don't want to start shooting at the 70 because what will you start if you do? If you said you'll start a full-fledged war with all the 13 colonies, you are absolutely correct. So, what happens is that someone, and we don't know in history who exactly did this, we just know that someone from the back of the Minutemen, the 70 men, fires a shot, whether it's towards the redcoats or up in the air, who knows. But we know that one of the shots was fired at the redcoats. And now when this shot rings out, both groups kind of react in self-defense. And when the firing happens, and it's very chaotic, and again, these 700 men are not ready to fight. These 700 redcoat soldiers are not going to wipe out the 70. They don't want to start the war. But when the shooting ends, 8 Minutemen are dead, 10 of them are wounded, so 18 out of 70, and 1 redcoat is wounded total. So if you look at those stats, 70 Minutemen or 70 militia soldiers actually only hit 1 redcoat soldier. Pretty bad shooting on their part. And again, these 700 men are not willing to wipe out anybody. But if you notice by the stats too, again, most of the Minutemen are running away. They're scared. They don't want to go to battle. The British, the redcoats, then march on to Concord. They destroy the remaining arsenal, what's there. And the redcoats turn around to march back to Boston. Now, during their march back to Boston, which they just, again, travel on major roads because that's all they know. They don't have GPS back then, and they don't know their way through the woods or shortcuts. Now, walking back to Boston, more and more Minutemen are showing up because they've heard through word of mouth what's happened. And the Minutemen, kind of just like the Indians had done before, the Minutemen are kind of just on the sides of these roads, and instead of fighting in straight lines, which the militia just couldn't stand in straight lines and fight a gentleman's war. So the Minutemen stood on the sides of the roads and just kind of picked off, almost like snipers, and with little skirmishes here or there, or little battles, the Minutemen fought back on their way. So the entire walk back that the redcoats had, they were fighting little tiny pockets of soldiers along the way. And when they get back to Boston, on paper, it shows that the British soldiers end up losing 3 times as many men as the colonists did. So of course on paper, and of course Sam Adams writing this, or Paul Revere writing this, or other Sons of Liberty writing to the papers, would show that stat, that 3 times as many British were lost in the battles as the colonists were. But if you think about what truly happened, the Americans lost badly. But on paper, again, it looks pretty good, and it helps the push for independence. So even today,